"Ma'am, step out of the vehicle before this gets worse." The sheriff's voice cracked across the gas station like a door slamming shut, sharp enough to turn every head by pump 3. Ava Brooks looked up from the steering wheel and saw Sheriff Daniel Harper standing beside her black SUV, one hand resting near his belt, mirrored sunglasses throwing back the hard noon light. The July heat shimmered above the asphalt in waves, bending the air over Route 9, and for a second the whole scene looked unreal, like something already recorded before it had fully happened. A trucker near the ice machine stopped mid-step. A teenage cashier pressed against the window inside the store. Someone by the diesel pumps lifted a phone. Harper tapped the glass again, slower this time, as if patience itself were a favor he was lending her. "This vehicle matches a theft report," he said, loud enough for strangers to hear. "So unless you've got a miracle explanation, I need you out now." Ava opened the door carefully and stepped into the heat with both hands visible. She wore dark jeans, a light tin blouse, and the kind of calm expression that did not belong to somebody caught doing what he was implying. But Harper had already decided what story this would be. It was there in the angle of his jaw, in the way he looked past her face and straight to the SUV, as if ownership could be measured by skin before paperwork ever entered the frame. Ava shut the door softly behind her and glanced once at the clock above the station awning. 12:14 p.m., too late for delay, too early for damage control. "Sheriff," she said, her voice low and steady, "run the federal registration before you take another step." Harper gave a dry laugh that wasn't really laughter at all. It was contempt dressed up as confidence. "Federal registration," he repeated, like the words tasted ridiculous in his mouth. Deputy Cole Mercer moved in behind him, younger, eager, already filming half the moment with his eyes even before his phone appeared in his hand. The radio on Harper's shoulder hissed with static. A flag on the edge of the lot snapped in the hot wind. Ava could feel the attention gathering around her, that terrible public silence people make when they sense humiliation coming and don't want to miss the front row seat. Harper asked for her license. She handed it over. He studied the name, then studied her, then looked back at the SUV as if the mismatch existed only in his imagination and somehow still counted as proof. "Ava Brooks," he said, "you expect me to believe this is your vehicle?" Ava met his stare without flinching. "I expect you to do your job correctly." That landed harder than if she had raised her voice. Mercer shifted. Harper's mouth tightened. Somewhere behind them, a gas pump clicked off with a hollow metallic thunk. Harper handed the license back like it offended him to touch it and motioned toward the SUV. "Pop the rear hatch." Ava did not move. The sunlight caught along the edge of the windshield, bright as a blade. "Sheriff Harper," she said, each word precise, "if you open that vehicle before checking the database, this stop is going to become the biggest mistake of your week." For the first time, something changed in his face. Not doubt. Not yet. Something thinner. A flicker. The kind of pause that comes right before a man in power decides whether to listen to truth or punish the person speaking it. Harper did not like being warned, especially not in front of an audience. The pause in his face hardened into something colder, and Ava knew that look. She had seen versions of it before in courthouse hallways, airport security lines, hotel lobbies, and federal buildings where some men wore authority like it was proof of wisdom. He took one slow step toward the rear of the SUV and tilted his head, the way men do when they want the room to understand who is in control, without ever saying the words out loud. Deputy Cole Mercer lingered near the passenger side, young and restless, his phone now low at his thigh, not hidden enough to be discreet and not bold enough to be honest. Around them, the gas station had gone unusually still. The trucker by the ice machine pretended to study a cooler door. A woman at pump 6 stopped squeezing the handle and watched through the reflection in her windshield. Even the hot wind seemed to hold itself back between gusts, as if the day were waiting to see which version of the truth would survive the next minute. Ava kept her hands at her sides. She did not argue again. She had learned long ago that some men heard calm as disrespect when it came from a black woman who refused to shrink. Harper circled the SUV with slow purpose, dragging his eyes over the glossy paint, the tinted rear windows, the government-grade tires, the subtle modifications most civilians would never notice. That should have been his first clue. It was not a flashy luxury vehicle. It was built for distance, control, and quiet protection. But Harper was not looking for clues anymore. He was looking for confirmation. "You are a long way from where a vehicle like this belongs," he said, almost casually, as if he were making conversation. The sentence hung there with all its hidden meaning exposed by tone alone. Ava turned toward him fully. "It belongs exactly where it is," she said. Mercer let out a small breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. Harper glanced toward the rear hatch, and then back at her. "Then you will not mind opening it." Ava looked once more at the clock beneath the awning. 12:15 p.m. A minute did not sound like much until a minute was attached to something that could unravel. In her left pocket, her secure phone sat dark and silent, but she knew what it represented. Timing, coordination, eyes in other places. Names that did not belong in the mouth of a county sheriff who had decided to make a public lesson out of a woman buying gas. She thought of her mother then, not because the memory was soft, but because it was useful. Lena Brooks had raised her in rooms where dignity had to be practiced the way other people practiced piano. Straight back, even breath, no wasted words, no surrender of self just because someone else needed you small to feel tall. When Ava was 12 years old, her mother had stood beside her in a department store after a clerk asked whether they could afford what they were carrying to the register. Lena had not shouted. She had not trembled. She had simply smiled with the kind of sadness that made the clerk look away first, then said, "Never let somebody else's small thinking edit your name." The memory came and settled inside Ava now like a steady hand between her shoulder blades. Harper reached for the rear hatch handle. "Last chance," Ava said, not louder, only clearer. "Call this in through the federal channel." He looked back over his shoulder, annoyed by the absence of fear in her voice. "You keep saying federal like it is supposed to impress me." "No," Ava said. "I keep saying it because it is supposed to stop you." Something flashed in Mercer's expression at that. Not guilt. Not yet. Just uncertainty, brief and thin as heat over asphalt. He shifted his weight and glanced at Harper, then at Ava, then at the SUV again. He was beginning to feel what Harper was too proud to admit. This did not fit. Not the vehicle. Not her composure. Not the way she kept checking time instead of escape routes. Not the way her eyes scanned the highway behind the station every few seconds, as if she were listening for something the rest of them could not hear yet. Harper ignored all of it. That was the danger of prejudice once it found a uniform. It stopped collecting facts and started arranging them. His hand closed over the hatch. The metal clicked softly beneath his fingers. Ava did not move. The sky above Route 9 was a hard white blue, empty except for heat. But in the distance, beyond the low hum of traffic and the flutter of the station flag, another sound was beginning to gather, too faint for anyone there to name, but close enough now to change everything. The rear hatch lifted with a soft mechanical sigh, and for one suspended second nobody moved. The inside of the SUV did not look like stolen property. It looked organized, deliberate, and sealed with the kind of precision that belonged to people who did not leave room for guesswork. A hard case sat strapped into the cargo area beside a plain dark duffel, both secured tighter than anything a casual thief would bother with. There was no clutter, no shopping bags, no loose fast food wrappers, nothing careless at all. Just order. Just intention. Harper stared in, waiting for the chaos he had promised himself he would find, and when it did not appear, his expression tightened like the heat had suddenly become personal. Deputy Mercer leaned closer from the passenger side and tried to see past him. The trucker by the ice machine took a few slow steps nearer without meaning to. Someone inside the station pushed. Opened the door, letting out a burst of refrigerated air and the smell of burnt coffee before the door swung shut again. Ava stayed where she was, shoulders level, face unreadable. She knew exactly what Harper saw now. The matte black hard case with federal transport seals, the clean-cut wiring tucked beneath a mounted console panel, the laminated route packet partially visible beneath the duffel, and the kind of restraint that only made sense when a vehicle was part of something bigger than the road it was sitting on. Harper reached in and pulled the route packet free. "Do not open that," Ava said. Her voice was calm, but it landed with a different weight now. There was no warning left in it. Only fact. Harper ignored her and turned the packet over in his hand. The envelope was marked with a security label and a barcode, plain enough to the untrained eye, but Mercer saw the seal and swallowed. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "maybe we should call this in first." Harper did not even look at him. He peeled back the flap, more offended by the suggestion than concerned by the material. Inside was a set of documents clipped in perfect order, all of them printed on heavy stock with official markings that looked unmistakably real, even from several feet away. Mercer stepped closer, then stopped. The woman at pump 6 lowered her phone halfway, as if suddenly unsure whether she should still be watching. Harper flipped the first page and went still. His chin lifted a fraction, then locked. The sound Ava had been listening for in the distance became clearer now, not loud yet, but approaching with disciplined speed. Harper scanned the page again, slower this time, and whatever confidence had carried him through the last 10 minutes began to drain from his face in careful, reluctant degrees. The route packet did not say what he wanted it to say. It did not make room for his assumptions. It named jurisdictions he did not control, channels he had not used, and a task force structure far outside county authority. He looked up at Ava, but not the way he had looked at her before. This time he was not trying to place her in a story. He was trying to escape the one he had written too early. "What is this?" he asked, and for the first time all afternoon, his voice had lost its performance. Ava glanced toward the highway. The sound was close now, tires over hot pavement, engines moving in formation. "The part where you realize I tried to stop you," she said. Mercer turned first. 3 dark SUVs appeared beyond the station sign and swept into the lot in a clean line, sunlight flashing across windshields, government plates catching the noon glare for half a heartbeat before the vehicles came to a controlled stop. Doors opened almost at once. Men and women stepped out in plain clothes and light tactical jackets, efficient and silent, their posture saying what their faces did not need to. Then a woman in a charcoal blazer moved around the lead vehicle and fixed her eyes on Ava before anyone else in the lot seemed able to breathe. Harper still held the federal packet in one hand, but now it looked less like evidence and more like something hot enough to burn through skin. The woman in the charcoal blazer crossed the gas station lot with the kind of focus that made everyone else seem temporary. The heat rolled off the asphalt in visible waves around her heels, but nothing in her pace changed. 2 agents moved behind her, scanning the lot, the pumps, the road, the faces, each detail taken in and stored without wasted motion. Ava did not wave. She did not call out. She simply stood beside the open rear hatch of the SUV and watched the moment arrive exactly as she had expected it would. Sheriff Harper remained frozen with the packet in his hand, his sunglasses still on, though now they looked less like authority and more like a shield he had forgotten how to use. Deputy Mercer stepped back half a pace and lowered his phone all the way to his side. The woman stopped a few feet from Ava first, not Harper, not the open vehicle, not the crowd. Her gaze moved quickly over Ava's face, her posture, the open cargo area, and the federal packet in the sheriff's hand. "Agent Brooks," she said, her voice clipped and controlled. "Report." Ava answered without hesitation. "County stop initiated at approximately 12:14. Vehicle was challenged as stolen. Sheriff opened secured material after verbal warning to verify through federal channels. No drama, no anger, just sequence, just record." The woman nodded once. "Understood." Only then did she turn to Harper. The shift in attention felt physical, like the air itself had tightened around him. "I am Supervisory Agent Elena Ruiz," she said. "This vehicle is part of an active federal operation. Why was a county sheriff accessing secured transport documents without clearance?" Harper swallowed before he answered, and even that small movement looked strange on him, as if his body had begun admitting what his pride still resisted. "The vehicle matched a report," he said. "I was conducting a lawful stop." Ruiz held out her hand. "The packet." Harper looked down at it for the briefest second before giving it over. She checked the seal he had broken, the first page he had handled, then closed it with a precision that somehow made the broken security tab look even worse. "Lawful stops still require judgment," she said. "And judgment requires facts before conclusions." Nobody around the pumps made a sound. The trucker had stopped pretending not to watch. The cashier stood just inside the station door with both hands wrapped around a roll of paper towels he clearly no longer remembered needing. Mercer kept his eyes on the ground. Harper straightened a little, trying to recover shape inside the collapse. If your agent had identified herself immediately, this could have been avoided. Ruiz did not blink. "She instructed you to run the federal registration before proceeding." Harper said nothing. Ava said nothing. That was the part that seemed to trouble him most now. The fact that the truth had been offered to him plainly, and he had refused it because it arrived in the wrong body, in the wrong tone, from the wrong woman for the story he wanted to believe. A loose receipt skittered across the concrete between the pumps. Somewhere down the road, a motorcycle passed in a long fading hum. Ruiz turned slightly toward Ava again. Was the mission timeline compromised? Ava glanced at the dashboard clock through the windshield, then toward the highway beyond the station. Not yet, she said. But we lost 11 minutes, and everyone in this lot saw the vehicle. Ruiz absorbed that without visible reaction, though the set of her shoulders sharpened. Harper removed his sunglasses at last, perhaps because the light had become too harsh, perhaps because he had realized mirrored glass could not hide a face already exposed. His eyes shifted from Ruiz to Ava and then away again. There it was at last, not apology, not courage, only the first raw edge of recognition. He was beginning to understand that the worst part of this was not that he had stopped the wrong person. It was that he had seen her, heard her, been warned by her, and still trusted his prejudice more than her truth. The noon heat pressed down harder now, flattening every sound in the lot until even silence seemed to hum. Supervisory Agent Elena Ruiz stood with the broken security packet in one hand and the weight of the situation in the other, her expression giving nothing away except control. Around her, the other federal agents moved with quiet efficiency, not dramatic, not rushed, simply resetting a space that Sheriff Harper had thrown off balance the moment he chose assumption over procedure. One agent closed the rear hatch of Ava's SUV with measured care. Another scanned the perimeter and spoke softly into an earpiece. Deputy Mercer remained near the passenger's side. His earlier swagger drained out of him, his phone now dark in his pocket like evidence of a smaller kind of failure. Ava stayed where she was, shoulders loose, face calm, though a faint red mark lingered on her wrist where the afternoon had already begun to write its record. Harper noticed it, and then looked away too quickly, as if even that small detail accused him more clearly than any report ever could. Ruiz stepped closer to him, not enough to threaten, only enough to remove the distance he might have used to hide inside. "Tell me exactly what made you believe this vehicle was stolen," she said. Harper cleared his throat. Dispatch-related description. Black SUV. Temporary stop. I made contact. Ruiz waited. The waiting did more damage than interruption would have. "And what linked this specific vehicle to the report?" she asked. Harper hesitated. A bead of sweat slid from his temple to the edge of his jaw. It matched the general description. Ruiz tilted her head slightly. General description is not probable cause by itself. So I will ask again. What linked this specific vehicle to the report? The cashier inside the station had stepped all the way to the doorway now. The trucker had folded his arms across his chest. Even the woman at pump 6 had forgotten her gas cap. Hanging open. Harper glanced at Ava, and that was answer enough. Not for the file, maybe. Not for policy language. But for every person standing there under that white July sky, it was enough. Ava saw the realization move across Mercer's face too. He had followed Harper's tone because that was easier than questioning it. Now, with federal agents on the lot and the air stripped clean of performance, all that remained was the ugly small truth beneath the badge-polished surface. Ruiz did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Agent Brooks gave you an opportunity to verify through the federal database," she said. "She instructed you before the packet was opened. She warned you before the rear hatch was touched. She told you, clearly, that you were making a mistake. Yet you continued." "What?" Harper's mouth parted, then closed again. No answer came that could survive daylight. He could not say instinct, because instinct sounded too much like bias when facts were absent. He could not say caution, because caution had been offered and rejected by the one person who knew more than he did. He could not say procedure, because procedure had not led him here. Pride had. Ruiz let the quiet hold for another second, then turned to Ava. "Can you still make the next checkpoint?" Ava looked toward the highway, where the road shimmered silver at the horizon. "Yes," she said. "But whoever is waiting for the handoff now has 11 extra minutes to wonder what changed." Ruiz gave one tight nod. "Then we move." She handed the packet to one of the agents and then paused before getting into motion, her gaze returning to Harper one final time. "County authority is not a license to improvise around federal clearance," she said. "And suspicion is not a substitute for discipline." The words landed clean, with no flourish, which made them harder to escape. Harper stood there in the middle of the lot, hat brim casting a thin line of shadow over eyes that no longer looked certain of anything. Ava took a step toward the driver's door, then stopped and turned back just enough for him to hear her. Her voice stayed even, almost gentle, which somehow made it cut deeper. "You did not stop a vehicle," she said. "You stopped at my skin and called it evidence." Nobody moved after that. The wind lifted a scrap of paper near the pumps and carried it across the concrete. Somewhere far off, a siren sounded and faded. Harper did not answer. For the first time since he slapped his hand against her window, he looked less like the most powerful man on that stretch of road, and more like someone standing alone inside the exact size of his own mistake. The federal vehicles began to pull out one by one, their dark bodies sliding back onto Route 9 with the same quiet precision they had arrived with, leaving behind a strange emptiness that felt larger than the lot itself. Heat shimmered above the pumps. The station sign buzzed softly. Somewhere behind the building, an air conditioning unit kicked on with a tired metallic groan, then settled into a steady hum. Ava stood beside the driver's door of her SUV for a moment without opening it, one hand resting lightly against the warm glass. The adrenaline had passed. What remained was something slower, heavier, and more familiar. Not fear, not anger exactly. Something closer to the old exhaustion of being forced, once again, to survive a lie somebody else had been too comfortable telling. She looked down at the faint mark on her wrist, then flexed her fingers once, as if reminding her own body that the moment was over even if its echo was not. Across the lot, Harper had not moved much. Without the noise of command around him, he looked older than he had 15 minutes earlier. The sharpness was gone from his posture. Even the badge on his chest seemed smaller now, dulled by sunlight and silence. Deputy Mercer hovered near the patrol car, uncertain whether to speak or disappear. He glanced at Harper, then at Ava, then away again. A young man learning too late that borrowed confidence can collapse faster than truth. Ava opened the door and leaned in just enough to place the secure phone on the center console beside the sealed case. The inside of the vehicle still held the cool, filtered scent of leather, paper, and electronics, a small island of order untouched by the humiliation outside. For a second, she let herself breathe there, one deep breath, then another. Her mother used to say that dignity was sometimes nothing more glamorous than breath taken on purpose. Lena Brooks had known that silence could either break a person or build one, depending on what they believed about themselves while standing inside it. Ava heard that voice now as clearly as if the woman were beside her in the passenger seat. "Hold your name steady. Do not hand it to people who have not earned it." The wind shifted and carried the smell of gasoline, hot rubber, and sunburned dust across the lot. When Ava straightened again, she saw the woman from Pump 6 quietly closing her gas cap and getting into her sedan. The trucker near the ice machine gave Ava one small nod before climbing back into his cab. The cashier stepped away from the doorway at last, his face changed by the kind of discomfort that comes when somebody has witnessed injustice close enough to feel implicated by their own stillness. No one applauded. No one said the right thing too late. The world did not pause to offer ceremony. It simply kept moving, which in some ways made the truth sharper. Harper finally removed his hat and ran a hand across the back of his neck, staring down at the concrete as though answers might be written there in oil stains and old tire marks. Ava watched him for one long second, not with pity, not with triumph, but with the distance of someone who understood that the deepest consequences are not always loud. Some of them arrive as knowledge and stay as shame. She got into the SUV and closed the door softly, shutting out the station noise until all that remained was the low interior hush and the ticking of cooling metal. Through the windshield, Harper was still standing where she had left him, alone in the same sun, under the same sky, but no longer protected by certainty. Ava started the engine, and as the dashboard lit beneath her hands, Route 9 stretched ahead in a white ribbon of heat, carrying her toward the next checkpoint, while something unfinished remained behind in the silence she left him to face. By the time Ava reached the next county line, the sun had shifted just enough to turn the road from white glare to a long sheet of hammered silver. The SUV moved steady at 60 miles an hour, engine quiet, tires humming over the hot pavement with the kind of rhythm that let a mind sort through what had happened weather it. wanted to or not. On the passenger seat lay the resealed packet Elena Ruiz had handed back to her with a look that said both later and keep moving. Ava kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the rearview mirror, not out of fear, but habit. The world looked ordinary again. Pine trees, power lines, a faded church sign promising Sunday mercy in chipped red letters. A man on a mower cutting a strip of grass beside a narrow mailbox. But ordinary had a way of hiding what it had just allowed. Her secure phone vibrated once against the console. She tapped the hands-free system. Brooks. Elena Ruiz came through clear and level. Checkpoint has been adjusted. You are still good for transfer. I also need you to know internal review has already contacted county administration. Ava kept her eyes on the road. That was fast. Not fast, Ruiz said. Necessary. For a moment, only road noise filled the line. Then Ruiz added, quieter. You warned him more than once. Ava let out a slow breath through her nose. He heard me. He just did not trust what he heard. Ruiz did not argue with that. She had been in the field too long for comforting lies. There is more, she said. The vehicle theft report he cited was for a gray crossover 2 counties west. Different plate structure. Different make. Different time stamp. Dispatch sent a broad advisory. He made the rest of it up in his head. Ava looked ahead at the road, but the gas station came back anyway in fragments sharpened by memory. The hand against the glass. The public voice. The way strangers had raised phones before facts. The way Harper had looked at the SUV, then at her, and decided the space between those two things had to mean crime. I know, Ava said. The line stayed quiet for half a second. Do you want him formally named in your field statement? Ruiz asked. The question was professional, but underneath it was something personal enough to matter. An opening. A chance to strike back with the full clean weight of procedure. Ava thought of Harper standing in the lot after she pulled away, hat in hand, badge still pinned on, but certainty gone. She thought of the cashier, the trucker, the woman at pump 6, all of them watching a lie rise and collapse in the same brutal light. She thought of Mercer learning, perhaps too late, how easily a person can become part of someone else's cruelty by calling it routine. Name the conduct, Ava said at last. Name the sequence. Name the refusal to verify. Name the broken seal. Name the assumption. Do not clean any of it up. But do not turn it into theater either. Ruiz was quiet long enough for the tires to thrum over a bridge seen beneath the vehicle. Understood, she said. You always do that. Ava almost smiled. Do what? Leave people with the truth instead of the performance. The call ended a minute later, and the silence inside the SUV settled around Ava like something earned. The road curved through a stretch of trees, throwing brief shadows across the dashboard, stripes of dark and light moving over her hands. She remembered being 15, sitting beside her mother on the front steps after a teacher accused her of plagiarizing a paper she had written herself. Ava had cried then, not because the accusation had frightened her, but because it had insulted the hours she had spent becoming someone precise. Lena Brooks had listened until the tears were gone, and then said, Baby, some people do not know what excellence looks like when it arrives in your skin. That is their poverty, not yours. Ava had carried that sentence into every room that tried to reduce her. Some days it felt like armor. Some days it felt like grief. Today it felt like both. The next checkpoint sign appeared half a mile ahead, green paint fading at the edges. Ava adjusted her grip on the wheel and lowered her speed. The mission was still alive. The day had not won against itself. And yet something in her knew the story was no longer contained to a gas station stop or a broken federal seal. Men like Daniel Harper did not change because they were embarrassed. They changed only if embarrassment managed to open the door that power had kept locked for years. As Ava took the exit, her phone lit once more with a new message from Elena Ruiz. It was only one line, but Ava read it twice at the red light before the checkpoint gate. County administration has requested Agent Brooks present in person tomorrow morning. The county administration building sat at the center of town like a promise someone had once believed in too easily. Red brick, white columns, a flag pulled half straight in the dry morning wind. When Ava stepped out of her SUV the next day, the sunlight was softer than it had been at the gas station, but the air still carried that same southern heat, the kind that settled into fabric and stayed there. She wore a navy suit, simple and exact, and carried no expression that could be mistaken for either fear or triumph. Inside, The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish, old paper, and coffee that had been sitting on a warmer too long. A county clerk led her past framed photographs of sheriffs, mayors, and ribbon cuttings, faces preserved in smiling certainty, and into a conference room with long windows and a polished oak table. Elena Ruiz was already there. So was Deputy Mercer, looking smaller in a pressed uniform than he had beside the patrol car. And at the far end of the table sat Daniel Harper without his hat, without his sunglasses, and somehow without the hard shape that had once made him seem so sure of himself. County Administrator Helen Pike stood as Ava entered, extending a hand with careful professionalism. "Agent Brooks," she said, "thank you for coming." Ava shook it once and took her seat. No one rushed to begin. The room held that particular silence created when consequences have finally caught up to a man who thought he would always arrive first. Pike opened a folder in front of her. "This meeting is being documented as part of an administrative review concerning yesterday's stop on Route 9. Her voice was calm, official, practiced. "We are here to establish the facts, acknowledge failures in judgment and procedure, and determine immediate corrective steps." Ava listened without moving. Elena Ruiz sat to her right with a pen laid neatly across a yellow legal pad. Mercer kept his hands clasped too tight in his lap. Harper stared at the table grain as if it were safer than any face in the room. Pike began with the record. Time of stop. Location. Vehicle description. Advisory mismatch. Failure to verify. Unauthorized access to federal materials. Public escalation. Missed de-escalation opportunities. Each item landed with the weight of something dry and undeniable, facts stripped of performance, exactly the way Ava had asked. When Pike finished, she turned toward Harper. "Sheriff," she said, "do you dispute any part of this summary?" Harper lifted his eyes at last. The room waited. His voice, when it came, had none of the command it once carried so easily. "No," he said. Pike nodded once. "Then I will ask directly what should have been asked before any of this happened. Why did you continue the stop after Agent Brooks instructed you to verify through federal channels?" Harper looked toward Ava, but not with anger this time. Not even with defense. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something he had avoided naming for years. "Because I thought I knew what I was looking at," he said. The sentence sounded smaller once spoken aloud. Pike did not rescue him from it. "And what did you think you were looking at?" Harper swallowed. Mercer shifted in his chair, but kept still. Ruiz did not blink. Ava said nothing. It had to be his sentence, or it would mean nothing at all. "I thought the vehicle did not fit her," Harper said finally, and shame entered the room so plainly, it almost changed the temperature. Nobody moved. Pike let the truth sit there without softening it. "Meaning?" He drew in one slow breath and forced himself to finish. "Meaning I made a judgment before I had evidence. And that judgment was shaped by race." The words were not elegant. They were not polished into some press office version of regret. That was what made them real enough to matter. Mercer looked down hard at his own hands. Pike made a note. Ruiz remained still, though Ava could feel the slight shift beside her that meant even she had not expected Harper to say it so plainly. Ava watched him in silence. She did not enjoy the sight of his humiliation. She had never wanted humiliation. What she had wanted, every time a room mistook her skin for permission, was this: naming. No disguise. No euphemism. No cowardly language about misunderstandings when the truth was bias wearing local authority. Pike closed the folder. "This office will be recommending immediate suspension pending full review, mandatory bias and procedure evaluation for involved personnel, and a public statement correcting the false theft implication attached to Agent Brooks." Then she turned to Ava. "Agent Brooks, before we conclude, is there anything you wish to add for the record?" Ava looked at Harper for one long second, then at Mercer, then at the photographs on the wall beyond the glass. All those old smiling men preserved in frames as if power had never needed examining. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that everyone had to listen harder. "Yes," she said. "Do not make this about one bad morning and one bad decision. What happened yesterday was not random. It was practiced. It only looked sudden because it was finally visible. No one interrupted. Outside the window, the flag moved once in the wind and then settled." Harper lowered his eyes again, but this time it did not look like retreat. It looked like a man hearing, perhaps for the first time, the full sound of what he had been. The meeting ended without ceremony. Chairs shifted softly against the floor. Folders closed. A pen was capped somewhere near the far end of the oak table. No one reached for small talk, and no one pretended the room had become lighter simply because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Ava stood first. The morning sun had climbed higher while they were inside, and through the tall conference room windows it poured across the polished table in long pale bands, catching the dust in the air and turning it visible for a moment before it vanished again. Elena Ruiz gathered her legal pad and rose beside her. Deputy Mercer remained seated a second longer than everyone else, staring at his clasped hands as if he had only just realized how often silence can become partnership when it chooses the wrong side. Daniel Harper did not look up right away. His hat sat on the table in front of him, brim curved, badge on the band catching a dull glint of light. Without it on his head, he looked less like a sheriff and more like a man left alone with the exact weight of his own reflection. County Administrator Helen Pike offered Ava a measured nod, neither warm nor cold, simply respectful. "Your statement will be attached in full," she said. Ava returned the nod once. "Thank you." That was all. No victory speech. No sharpened last word. She had not come for spectacle. She had come for record. She had come for truth to stand on paper where no one could later edit it into something smaller. In the hallway outside, the courthouse air felt cooler, touched by the low hum of old ventilation and the faint scent of lemon cleaner worked into tile over years. Framed photographs watched from the walls as Ava and Ruiz walked past. Men in uniforms and campaign smiles, hands on podiums, ribbons between fingers, all those frozen faces from decades that had rarely been asked what, exactly, their authority had cost the people beneath it. Ruiz spoke only when they reached the front steps. "You handled that the way you handle everything," she said. Ava slid on her sunglasses and looked out across the square. A delivery truck rolled past the courthouse lawn. Two women came out of a bakery carrying coffee. A little boy tugged on his father's hand near a crosswalk, impatient for a light to change. Life had already resumed its ordinary rhythm, as though ordinary had not always depended on who was forced to absorb the damage in order to keep it looking calm. "I handled it the way it needed to be handled," Ava said. Ruiz gave a brief nod. "For what it is worth, that room heard you." Ava let the words settle without answering. She knew better than to confuse hearing with changing. But hearing was still a beginning, and some beginnings arrived so quietly they almost hid inside the air. Ruiz headed toward her sedan after that, phone already in hand, the day pulling her back into schedules and reports and names that needed protecting. Ava descended the courthouse steps alone and crossed the brick walk toward her SUV. The morning light lay warm across the hood. Reflected in the dark glass for one passing second, she saw herself superimposed over the courthouse columns behind her, a black woman standing where history had not always made room for her, and yet could no longer pretend she was not there. She opened the driver's door, paused, and looked back once. Through the second-floor window, barely visible behind the glare, a figure stood near the conference room glass. Daniel Harper. Motionless. Watching. Not an authority now. Not an accusation. Just watching. As if the distance between where he had stood yesterday and where he stood now was the first real measure he had taken in years. Ava did not wave. She did not need to. Some reckonings do not ask for witnesses. They only ask to be survived. She got into the SUV and closed the door softly. The cabin wrapped around her in cool, filtered air and the low, familiar hush of leather, paper, and electronics. On the passenger seat lay the resealed packet, neat and silent. Her secure phone rested beside it, dark for the moment. Ava placed both hands on the steering wheel and sat still before starting the engine, listening to her own breath, steady and unbroken. Outside, the courthouse flag stirred once in the wind. Sunlight slipped across the windshield. Somewhere a church bell marked the hour, its sound traveling clean through the square before fading into the heat. Then Ava started the vehicle and pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the building, the meeting, the record, and the man who had finally been forced to hear the difference between power and truth. The town grew smaller in the mirror with each passing block until at last it became only brick, light, and distance. Ahead, the road opened bright and quiet beneath the late morning sky, and Ava drove on with her name intact, while behind her the silence of justice settled into place and stayed there.